Hello, my name is Sunny Mullen. I am the Director of Outreach with Help Hope Live, and we are here today to talk about our Hope Talk, Making College Accessible. I will let everyone enter the room for a minute, but I appreciate everyone coming to learn a little bit more since we are talking about college today. I am personally repping my Fordham Rams, absolutely. So, um, we will get started in just a minute, but thank you again. Some housekeeping. We do have a Q&A section for anyone who has a question for any of the panelists throughout the conversation. We do also have the chat function for anyone who has, any thoughts or concerns or anything throughout the chat, wants to say hello. We love to hear your input. This is being recorded and it will live on our YouTube page, as well as will be sent out to all of the registrants within the next 24 hours. So again, my name is Sunny Mullen with Help Hope Live. Thank you guys so much. And I think we can get started here. I am very happy and honored to introduce our panelists, Annie Tulkin from Accessible College and Kasie and Austin Somerville, some wonderful Help Hope Live clients, ambassadors, and a Clemson student, personal care attendant, and mom, and so much more. So I will let them. Oh, we already have a Go Tigers.
Hey,
We
there
might
you
get a
go.
lot of that. We might get a lot of that. I'm a Clemson
Yeah,
fan.
Tigers for sure.
Yes. So, well, then I'll let you guys take it off. If Kasie and Austin, if you want to give a brief introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Austin Somerville. I'm a sophomore here at Clemson studying financial management. And I just want to thank you guys so much for this opportunity just to share my experience and hopefully help others and kind of help pave the way a little bit for disability to get into college because I think it's very important and healthy. So thank you all again.
Mhm. I'm Kasie Somerville. I am Austin's mother, but here on campus, I am only his PCA, his full-time PCA here at Clemson University. Thank you.
Do any people not associate the two? Like, do you guys try? Just hit me up
Um,
with that, Annie. I promise I'm going to get to you. But that just triggered something in me. Do
Yeah.
people not associate you guys as parent, son, and more so as PCA?
some put two and two together, but I
Yeah,
mean, for the most part, they don't know.
yeah. That's
And
cool though.
but sometimes when my mom tries to be professional, they're like, "Yeah, his PC." I'm like, "She's my mom."
Yeah.
So
Yeah, he
I
gets
don't,
it up
I
way
don't,
before I do.
I
Yeah,
don't, I'm not in that, mindset where I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I can't have my mom on campus."
Yeah.
It's she hangs out and it's awesome.
that's
I'm
great.
very intentional about the minute I step on campus that I am totally out of a mom mindset. I work for the state to help this person get through college, and I call him boss. And that keeps that in place. I try to stay MIA as much as possible. So if we're in a setting that maybe I should be nearby, I'm not standing next to him. I might be like over behind a tree or something. So,
I can
just
see you
trying to
peering
give
from
him as
behind a
much,
tree.
yeah, as much on his own as he can. And I do, like, people ask me, who are you? Why are you here? Or are you a professor? And I'm like, no, I do work here. I work for a student.
That's
And,
cool.
I do that out of respect for Austin to just have the best possible experience for him, because frankly, probably most people don't want to bring their mother to campus. So
I have to, out of
he's really
respect,
great about it, thankfully.
yeah,
Sorry.
I have to, out of respect, let you know that we did get another Go Tigers. I will just keep rallying
Hey,
them as we
go
go.
Tigers! Let's go!
Um,
Let's go!
Welcome. Thank you for being here. You can introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Annie Tulkin. I am the CEO and founder of Accessible College. At Accessible College, I provide college transition support and preparation for students with physical disabilities. So that might be students who use wheelchairs or mobility devices or are ambulatory and sometimes use wheelchairs and mobility devices. And I have a lot of clients with spinal cord injuries, muscular dystrophy, neuromuscular disorders, rare diseases, a whole spectrum of students and personhood. And I also support students with chronic health conditions. So that is another big umbrella term. So I have a lot of clients who have things like POTS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Crohn's disease, diabetes, um, all kinds of conditions. And, many of the students that I work with also have co-occurring, learning disabilities, mental health conditions. We are whole people, and so we are usually do not just fit into one box neatly. So I support students holistically. And I got into this work because I used to be the associate director of the Disability Support Office at Georgetown University, which is called the Academic Resource Center. And if you're new to the disability world and higher education, you should know that every college, every university has a disability support office. They all have different names. And so I worked at one called the Academic Resource Center, and they might have names like Disability Support Services, Accessibility Services, Student Disability Services. That's going to come up a lot, I'm guessing, in this conversation. Um, and so through my business Accessible College, I have a partnership with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. So students with paralysis can work with me for free through the Reeve Foundation, any type of paralysis. And I also have a partnership with the Muscular Dystrophy Association where I work with their scholarship recipients. And I also have an online course called Preparing Students with Physical Disabilities and Health Conditions for College. And it's great for parents, for educators, for healthcare providers. So folks can check that out. And I know Sunny's going to drop some links in for people to see as well. So that is me.
Absolutely. Well, to get started into the conversation here, and I know you obviously deal with a whole slew of individuals and their own personal journeys, but Annie, if you could maybe provide it as best you can, a general overview of what does that transition to college might look like for a student, or what does your first conversation look like with someone who's wanting to go to college?
Yeah. So first, there are a couple things that folks should be aware of. So I work with students, across the country, and I see people in sort of different spaces and places coming from different backgrounds and approaching the college search or the post-secondary search in different ways, right? The key things to know are that high school is under a different set of laws than college, right? So the K through 12 experience falls under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That's the law that provides for IEPs for IEPs or individualized educational programs for students who receive special education supports and services. And Section 504 is another law that sort of comes into play here. And in the high school context, Section 504 is an anti-discrimination law that provides students with disabilities equal access to education in the K through 12 setting. When a student goes to college, the law changes to the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the ADA provides for reasonable accommodations, and I'm doing air quotes here purposefully, because what is reasonable really varies based on, the physical space of the campus, the program that the student is in. And so it's really important that students are aware of this shift and also thinking about building up their self-advocacy skills as they move into the college setting. Because when a student goes to college, another huge change that occurs is that students have to self-disclose. They have to connect with the disability support offices. They have to be able to articulate what their needs are, talk about their conditions, their disabilities, talk about the accommodations they think they might need. And so it's really important that students start preparing earlier on to think about all of these needs. And I know today we're going to talk about Austin's experience and with his mom as a PCA. And we use the term PCA. We've already used it. We should say that means personal care attendant. And that's another part of like the college language of things, because sometimes in high school, students will have one-on-one aides or paraeducators. So there is a language shift that also occurs here.
Acronyms are fun for sure.
So, and if we use acronyms that folks don't know, feel free to drop something in the comments or chat and ask us what we're talking about, because yeah, the terminology does change. So it's important that people understand the legal shifts, the importance of the student being a self-advocate and being able to like have those skills ready to go. and the fact that the Disability Support Office at each college, and there are about 4,500 colleges across the United States, they each have their own process for students to request accommodations. They have their own documentation guidelines, and they vary in different ways. So it's really important that students as consumers, when you're going to college and you are a consumer, that you're looking at the different disability support offices, understanding how their process works, and asking questions. And students and families can do that prior to committing to a university, as they're engaging in tours, engaging in the application process. It's okay to ask questions. And that's an important part of thinking about the college search process. So, Sunny, I hope that answered it.
Absolutely, and more for sure. But to step back a little bit and Austin, talk about your experience. You were injured later or in the middle of your high school years. And so how did your injury, if at all, play into your choice of a college and that transition?
Yeah, so I mean, growing up in Greenville, like I always kind of knew about Clemson, and then definitely when my injury happened at 16, obviously like the thought of college was still a thought I had, but I wasn't really focused on that right now. I was very focused on therapy and just getting better and finishing off high school, right? Because like that can definitely, a catastrophic injury can push out your high school graduation tremendously. And so I very quickly went online and was able to finish my high school only a semester late. But then when it did come time to pick which college, definitely Clemson was just like it was just where I wanted to go,
Yeah.
and I think the important thing is that really I don't think it's smart to kind of like, well, I shouldn't say your injury shouldn't dictate where you go. Like go where you want to go. Go to the college you want to go. I wanted to go to Clemson because I love Clemson. I was aware of their education, and I was aware of just it's a very good social school. There's, great connections there. And I had a lot of personal connections before even going to Clemson. And so that's where I wanted to go. And then really I knew that was the first step. And then the next step was like, okay, how can we make my injury work here? How can we make my disability work here? And so really the process of like getting hurt when I was 16 and then finishing high school and picking a college. I just knew as Clemson, I knew I wanted to make Clemson work. Um, and so really it's just about where do you want to go and then just figuring it out from there.
Yeah. And Kasie, putting on your parent hat now, how did you as a mom, did that scare you? Did that, the thought of him as a mother, no matter what their lifestyle, they're going off to college, but he has a new challenge and a new, a whole new world to navigate. How are you thinking at this point?
We just kind of knew that we had already lived in a way that we're gonna break barriers. Like we are not gonna be these statistics, like 90% of people with spinal cord injury, especially quadriplegia, never leave their home. And thankfully, right off the bat, like we just knew that this wasn't going to, we weren't going to accommodate this. We were going to push barriers and do things that fulfilling dreams and fulfilling goals in life were still possible, and we were just going to find a way to do it. But a wise man also has many advisors, and so we knew that there was many people like you, Sunny, and you, Annie, and all of these foundations and organizations that had people that had already blazed the way before us. Swim with Mike, they have been amazing with helping to connect us with other people who have done this before. And just getting advice from them and learning from others, I think, is crucial. Just knowing that you're not alone and that somebody has done it before. So it was just a matter of finding a way and just not settling into like Austin said, having the mindset of accommodating your injury, instead making your injury accommodate the way you want to live.
That's great. And Annie, I know you were talking a little bit about the difference between PCAs and one-on-ones, and with, Kasie is Austin's PCA when she steps onto campus, and how how do you when does that conversation come up for you, Annie, when you're talking to individuals, and how do they navigate that process?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sunny. And it manifests itself in different ways. I think before I jump into that, I want to just like echo what Austin said about, navigating your college search based on your interests and, like the culture that you want on campus and like the sort of things
Yeah.
that you're looking for. I think that it's really important that folks recognize that students with disabilities are just like any other student,
Yeah.
right? Like they are interested in, what they're interested in. And so I often say that students should guide that college search, with the typical interests in mind. This is where like the accommodations and the sort of support services at the school might be another consideration as the students are sort of honing in on the school. But, it doesn't have to be the guiding factor, right? It's one factor of many. And the accommodations can actually make things work well. Because sometimes people will look at a school and they'll say, oh, it's just not going to be physically accessible. But that's where the accommodations may come in and make things more accessible for that student. So I think that that's important for people to just sort of like frame. There is no perfect place. So like it does,
Right.
does not exist. So in many ways, it's thinking about like how can we have these accommodations, or does a school sort of universally design things so that things are more accessible to students? So putting that on this side for a second, the personal care attendant conversation, in general, when anybody's planning for any sort of transition, it's early, the earlier you start, the better, right? So like starting to seed these conversations as early as possible is great, right? The most students start to sort of dig into the college search stuff around junior year of high school, right? That's like the typical time the counselors start talking about it more. Students are going on tours and things. When you're planning for a personal care attendant, there's more to think about, right? So there are two colleges in the United States that have personal care attendant programs. One is University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana. The other is Wright State in Dayton, Ohio. They're different in their levels of support and how how those systems work. But those are the only two that have sort of the built-in programs. Everywhere else, students have to fund, hire, and manage their own personal care attendants. Um, and so parents often ask me, like, what does this look like? And how does this work financially, right? That's like, because college is expensive and then you have an added cost here, right? So sometimes students use Medicaid or Medicaid waivers. There are some restrictions around that based on your state and your things, Medicaid stuff that's happening. And so it's important that people know sort of what they may or may not be able to do with their Medicaid waiver or with Medicaid in their state. Some people use private insurance. Some people use supplemental security income funds, SSI money. And there's nuances around all of these things. Some
And
people choose to private pay,
yeah,
and
some
hire.
people fundraise.
Some people
Yeah.
fundraise.
Yeah.
This is one of the many
Yeah.
options. And it could be a combination of all of
Yeah.
many of these systems, right? Sort of based on what the student needs. And so it's really important that people understand that like it can be done. Some students will hire other students to support them. Some students will center their college search around looking at schools that have nursing programs,
Yeah.
occupational therapy programs,
Oh,
PT
interesting.
programs, so that they can like find a pool of people, because oftentimes those students need to, get experience in their fields. And this is a great way to do it by working for another student. Some people use home health agencies or hire individuals. So there's a lot of different ways that this can be done. When I work with clients and through my online course, there's a section on sort of thinking about your needs. A lot of students and families, and I'm sure that Austin can sort of speak to this experience, when you're living with your parents, things just sort of happen, right? Like things, and from a mom's perspective too, it's like you just make the trains run on time. You're just like, you're on autopilot. But when you actually have to list out like, what are the needs, right? So
Yeah.
thinking about what are the things that the personal care attendant does, like the job description, and then like hour by hour, minute by minute sometimes of what are those things that have to be done. That's usually where I start with students and families to sort of illustrate, for the young adult, like what goes on behind the curtain.
Mhm.
And then also for them to sort of understand like the management, if you are hiring an outside person, like who's checking to make sure that these things are getting done? Like, are they being done in a way that's comfortable for you? Because we are talking about issues too of like body autonomy. If we're talking about somebody bathing you or supporting you in more personal ways with toileting or other things,
Mhm.
like you have to be comfortable having uncomfortable conversations.
Mhm.
And so I'll often help students sort of navigate how to have those conversations. I had to teach someone how to fire someone recently.
Oh,
So that's
yeah,
another part of this experience. I joke with students that once you've done this, you can add like, HR manager to your LinkedIn profile because like onboarding and hiring someone,
Right.
managing them day to day, and then going through these processes with them is a lot. It's a
yeah,
lot.
It is.
And
absolutely.
it's a big learning curve. So
Yeah.
I'll pause there though, Sunny, because I'm sure you have some great questions for
Well,
Austin.
no, I have a question I want to ask Kasie of
Oh,
something that you told us that was unique to Austin's situation with, we know you were going to Clemson, but Kasie, what made Austin unique in this situation with him having a PCA? You were telling us that he was a first in this world.
Yeah, Student Accessibility Services said Austin was one of the first on Clemson University campus to live in a dorm full-time on campus and have a full-time personal care attendant. So that really, they had to change up some things and learn
Yeah.
some things and adapt accordingly. And they've done a phenomenal job, but that was a learning curve for them because you're talking about everything from, where do I park
Yeah.
every day? And Clemson campus is very difficult to find
Very
parking.
difficult.
So to pay for that spot and give that spot up was hard for
Yeah.
Student Accessibility Services to do, but they did. And they ate the funds for that. They did that for me and for Austin. And just some of those things like, me having the global safety check in order to have a
Mhm.
Tiger One card to be able to access the building. I had to have a full background, global background check to make sure that I was safe to be on campus. So even just all those little details that they had to throw in there, but they're from our experience, they're always willing to do what they need to do to get that student their education, and it's powerful.
And
That's
like with
amazing.
that, like right before graduating high school, and now we're thinking about college, and I knew I wanted to go to Clemson, like I said, and so it was like, okay, like would I have to live at home? Like I live 20 minutes
Mhm.
away. We could make that work. But I'm like, man, I really want
Yeah.
that experience. Like I don't, I go to college, I want to do it. And so, like Annie said, sitting down and having those conversations about how can I make this work? Like this is what I want to do. How can I make this work? And so, and then, with my mom just doing this, like we made it possible. And there's a lot of concerns I had. There's a lot of anxiety heading to college of like, how am I going to do this?
Yeah.
What about this? What about that? What about transportation? What about etc.
Mhm.
But I think one thing I realize is there is an answer. You just got to find it. And you can do it. So, yeah.
And so not only, Austin, were you one of the first, or I guess maybe even the first with a PCA on campus, but you were one of the first wheelchair users at Clemson, correct? Or
Not so much
one
the
of,
first wheelchair user.
not maybe the first, but certainly within their first wave of wheelchair users.
Yeah, I would definitely
And
say, yeah.
so how has that adjustment, or what have you seen on campus as far as accommodations or your experience in transitioning onto campus life?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and it was just a moment of vulnerability, a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. It's definitely a transition. I mean, college alone is a transition. It's a new stage of life. It's difficult for anybody to adjust. And then you add, a very, a big physical disability on top, like there's some extra concerns. And there's been tough days, there's very much tough days and figuring out how am I going to do this. And there's some days where it's like, man, this is really hard. But one thing that it really boils down to is I would much rather deal with the resistance of trying to live on campus. I'd much rather deal with the struggles and the stresses, and I'd rather deal with those things than to look back and be like, man, I just completely threw out the baby with the bathwater. Like I gave it all up instead of breaking through those walls. And so at the same time of there is struggles and it is difficult, like there's also a lot of joy and happiness that comes from it. I've made tremendous friends here, and knowing that I'm getting an education, I'm working towards my career. I am doing what I can, through my injury. And so and there's still like it is tough. Like Clemson's a very active campus. You see people running, you see people doing this, and you're like, I'd love to do that. But like I'm still building my own life,
Mhm.
and just to reiterate, like I'd much rather deal with the resistance and the pushbacks and the really difficult days. I'd rather deal with that than to deal with regret and be like, man, I just gave it all up. I gave up the good times along with the hard times. I gave up so much. And so I think for anyone who's like having stresses about like, man, how would I even do college, or how could I ever make that decision, or man, like I don't think I can do this. Like you can, you can. And there's amazing people like Annie who will help you do it, and so take those advantages and be ready for the tough days. They're coming, but it's very much worth it. Very much worth it.
Thank you so much. I just get chills, not gonna lie. But one thing I picked up on that you said earlier is that you needed to be ready to go to college. And I also think that college needed to be ready for you to be there. So how was Clemson ready for you, or how did they become ready for you?
Yeah, and so communication.
Yeah.
Uh, communication. It's sometimes they don't know what you need unless you like talk to them, unless you ask them. And
You
so
became that self-advocate, like Annie mentioned.
exactly. And so sitting down with them, I told them, hey, I need my own private bathroom. I need to live on campus and I need an accessible dorm. So literally my room and my floor is the only door that has an automatic waiver where I scan my card, I wave the sensor and the door opens for me. Like they installed that just for me. I also live in a suite where I have my room here. There's another room across the wall, and then there's two bathrooms. This is supposed to hold four people,
Mhm.
and kind of two separate living areas, but I get it all. They gave it all to me. Yes, the other room I have for some like therapy places and her having her desk space to
Mhm.
do what she needs to do and to
Food.
food, right?
Yeah, all your
Um,
food.
and so just talking to them, talking like, hey,
Mhm.
this is what I need, and they'll help you. Talking with teachers, something that's for example, like when it's raining in my scooter, that's difficult because then say
Yeah.
if I get to the classroom and I have to rely like I use loft strand crutches. So I have my scooter, I have a four-wheel scooter. So I transfer into that and then I just drive outside the classroom and then I walk in with my crutches. And if there's any wet on the floor, if my crutches slip, like
Yeah.
no way I'm catching myself. I'm on the floor. Uh and so I just let my teachers know, like, hey, since it's raining outside, there's probably water or I've seen it. There's
Yeah.
water tracked in from students walking in. It's really not safe that I walk that due to my injury. I can't catch myself.
Mhm.
My crutches slip. I won't be able to make class. And they understand. They really understand. And then Clemson's disability program is student accessibility services. So
Mhm.
I'm registered through them, and then they send messages to my teachers saying, hey, this student
Nice.
has a disability. These are their accommodations. You're forced to comply to these. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, just really communication.
Yeah.
And also you're not gonna figure everything out day one. You know, you're
Yeah,
not gonna
no.
figure everything out day one. But for example, like I remember I was like how am I gonna go to class by myself? Like how am I gonna get in the classroom, sit down, like who's gonna help me? And so I was thinking like my mom's gonna have to, come with me at every class, and that's fine. That's what a PCA
Mhm.
does, absolutely. Um, but then just a couple of trial runs within the first week, I was going to class by myself,
Nice.
and students, every single class I've had are always willing to help.
Hmm.
For example, my stat class this semester, it took 3 days, and a guy pretty much self-designated himself to help me with the door every single time,
Nice.
sit by me, help put my crutches in the corner. He did it himself, and so
Is he
like
claiming credit for that anywhere? Do we know, do you need to sign off at the end of the semester?
no, but like just meeting, like people are kind. People are kind, and
Yes.
they help, and if you and I sometimes you do need to ask for help. Sometimes I do ask for help, and they're like, absolutely,
Hmm.
and so just communication,
Yeah.
taking it day by day. And kind of like I said, it's just there always is an answer. It just may take some time to figure that out. And so,
Mhm.
um, yeah, I'd say just communication.
It is huge, absolutely. And Annie, what kind of accommodations are the colleges actually obligated to do and to act on?
Yeah, and Austin painted such like a great picture of his
Yes.
experience. You've seen one experience, you've seen one experience, right? And so like it's important that people understand that like there are variations of this experience at different institutions, sort of based on, housing setups and a whole bunch of other
Yeah.
things. But just in general, so as federally funded institutions, universities, colleges have to follow the ADA and be technically ADA compliant. Austin and I were joking earlier that like what is ADA compliant is not
Yeah.
always usable for the person who needs it, right? And this specifically comes up a lot with physical accessibility, right? Because what might work for
Yeah.
someone with a manual wheelchair, for example, may not work as well for someone with a power wheelchair, which might
Mhm.
be bigger, right? So like there are variations in what works. There are compliance standards that the US Access Board put together for like physical building standards and whatnot. But things were built at different times and who
Yeah.
was checking that day and there's a lot of variation. So I will say that like in general, like if a student needs any type of accommodation, they have to connect with the disability support office to make that request, right? There are different types of accommodations, right? So like there are classroom accommodations, so it could be relocating a class if that class is not in an accessible
Mm.
space. It could be classroom furniture that's accessible because there might be desks that have sort of attached desk chair situations, which might not
Yeah.
be good for someone who needs to roll up and roll under a desk or transfer to a chair, right? So those are sort of some like physical disability classroom accommodations or like note takers, things
Yeah.
like that, right? Another type of academic accommodation. But then there's also the housing pieces, right? And
Yeah.
that Austin talked about his awesome setup, which is, I'm sure,
Sounds bigger than my first apartment in New York, let me tell you,
yeah, I
but
was like, this sounds great. So, part of it is that students have to request a personal care attendant as an accommodation. So, what Cassie was talking about with having a card to be able to swipe into the dorm and to be able to, get into the library or navigate spaces that Austin is navigating. If a college has not done this before, they might be a little bit like, oh, how does this work? And it sounds like there was a little bit of that at Clemson, but then they figured it out.
Right.
So many colleges have personal care attendant policies, which require a
Mm.
personal care attendant to have a background check, which is what Cassie was talking about. Because in a dorm situation or in a residence hall situation, we now call them residence hall.
Yeah.
In a residence hall situation, there are people of different ages. There might be people who live in that residence hall who aren't 18 yet. And so the university has to be careful about, who it's approving to live in a space or to have access to a space, which is why background checks are usually part of bringing a personal care attendant on campus. So if a student uses a home health agency, generally the home health agency has already done a background check, and so they might do that. Some colleges will do the background checks, but it looks different at almost every institution. These practices are very different. So students would want to connect with the Disability Support Office to ask about that. The housing stuff looks different too. For example, there are some colleges that don't have any residence hall rooms with ensuite bathrooms, right? So they only have community bathrooms. And sometimes they only have that for, first year students might all have community bathrooms, but upper class students might have access to apartments or suite style bathrooms or things like that. So then there's a conversation about what is necessary for that student to be able to live, safely and effectively in that space, right? So these are all conversations that students would have with the Disability Support Office and likely with housing as well, because sometimes the people in the Disability Support Office might be experts in the accommodation side, but they don't know every, housing, all the housing stock on campus, right? So it's really important for students to think about, what they might need and prepare for those conversations. And then there might be other accommodations, transportation. Some colleges provide point-to-point transportation for students with disabilities. Some colleges have shuttle systems, and maybe every shuttle is accessible, maybe not. It could be that a student has to call anytime they need an accessible shuttle, and it's variable based on the place. So these are things for students to look at. Dining accommodations comes up a lot too. Like it's like one of the last ones that people think about. But, if you can't carry the tray and do your food selection, you might need support in the dining hall. And like Austin said, usually people make friends, and it's like then your friend is just grabbing their food, they grab your food, it's not a huge deal. But sometimes you might be in a rush and like you might need support from somebody in dining services to help you quickly get what you need, so you can, get your food. Or it might be a meal plan reduction, right? So there are some students who use G-tubes or do other sorts of feeding or have specialized diets. So there's a lot of accommodations that might be around that as well. So I'm sharing all this to say there's a broad spectrum of what this could look like. And I think it's sometimes challenging for students and families because there's really no menu for like what you can choose. It really is based on the documentation that the student provides, the interview, the interactive process that the Disability Support Office is having with that student, and what the student is conveying their needs are, right? And so that's why it can be helpful to sort of use some of the resources that we've mentioned, some of the foundation stuff and some of the guides that I've created too, so that you know what to ask for or think about going into these conversations. That can be really helpful.
Absolutely. And Kasie,
I'd
you
like
have
to
some,
add
yeah,
something
please.
it spurred my mind when you said something there, Annie. I really would encourage also to go to the campus and not just communicate over the phone, because the first time that we came to the campus, we thought, okay, well, Austin's going to use his wheelchair and he's going to use his Lofstrand crutches when he needs to. And the day that we came, it was super hot, and it was during the summer. And we started walking to look at the dorms. We wanted to check out the dorms and see what ones would actually work for him. And we went to one, and the sink was not in the bathroom. It was out in the bedroom. And so then we're like, no, we need the sink next to the toilet in a private area, and we were like, okay, that won't work. Okay, let's go check out this other dorm. And when you went to go over to that other dorm, we realized, okay, in this heat, this is just too much to try to walk. And so then Clemson campus is very hilly. So then we realized, oh, wait a minute, he's not going to be able to do his wheelchair because these hills are brutal. And so then it was like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And we literally sat down like on the curb and looked at the lady from SAS and we're like, what are we going to do? Like, and she's like, I think there's a power scooter over at parking services. Let me go look. And so we just sat there on the curb. She went
Light
over and
bulb.
got it. What?
Light bulb.
Light bulb moment.
Light bulb,
And
yeah.
she came over and Austin's like, that's it. like he, just that day on campus, we figured out transportation for him. And it was totally different than what we thought it was going to be before we
Yeah.
came to campus. And so I thought that was really, really powerful, but also touching on to the dorm situation. We asked them to kind of think out of the box because every dorm they were showing us, it just didn't fit like with Austin's needs. And so finally she said, well, we do have ADA dorms over in the honors building, but that's for people who are in the honors program. And Austin chose not to be in honors, but she was like, do you want to see him? And we were like, yeah. And so, well, first of all, we came up the elevator and it opened up and there is a glass wall overlooking the stadium. And he knew immediately,
Oh.
this is my dorm. But then, just these dorms were more updated because it was a newer building and it fit him perfectly. And thankfully, Student Accessibility Services said, okay, you can have this ADA room even though you're not in the honors program, and they accommodated, and it was wonderful. So just thinking out of the box with them, being consistent and advocating for yourself about what needs you need to have, and not just being like, well, that'll be okay. If it's really not okay, then don't say it's okay. And they'll find a solution. But then also getting on campus and really figuring it out over the summer, you'll tweak it even better.
There's definitely a lot to be said for the practical experience, because I think any wheelchair user or anyone in a wheelchair user's life has the experience of being told that something's accessible and getting there, and there's 2 steps to the door. I've been there with my brother. I know you guys definitely have been there, and you have to actually go and experience a place for yourself. And because accessible means something completely different to everyone saying it. So that's a really great piece of advice, Kasie. Absolutely. And in that, Kasie, I also wanted to ask you, just as a mom, how are you empowering Austin to live this life through college as well? And how are you seeing what he's doing? Crazy enough now, almost midway through his college experience.
I'm sorry, please ask me the beginning of that question again.
How are you, just like as a mom, and you and your husband, empowering him to be this self-advocate? And because I know you guys instill a lot of trust in him, and how have you set him up to be as successful as I know he's been in his years?
I think that definitely as a parent, you consider their age, and it's like, okay, Austin's now 21. It's like, you are an adult, and part of being an adult is giving them adult responsibilities. And I think that one of the most tragic things that a parent could do with a child that has any kind of medical issue or a disability is to treat them differently, or to treat them with like a sick child syndrome, and because then you're actually disabling them even more. And we didn't want that. We wanted it to be, okay, we will be your support system like we should be, but you have a whole full life still to live. You have goals and dreams. Nothing has changed. Just because you can't do some of your self-care and your a lot of things you can't do the way you used to do them, it doesn't mean that we can figure everything out. And so really it's just supporting him to be the best that he can be in every way, which is what parents do anyway. And so it's really not all that different if you don't make it different. And we were determined not
that is a
to
great
make it
point.
different. There's nothing that has really changed except just the way we do things.
That is beautiful. You guys are giving me chills left and right, let me tell you. So as we somehow jump to nearing the end of our hour, I just want to see, Annie, if you have any other words of wisdom or pieces of advice for people beginning this process, or Actually, one thing popped into my head too. Do you ever deal with people at different ages? Because, you know, obviously, you know, Austin's gone somewhat the traditional route. He is the traditional age for college. Do you ever deal with individuals who aren't in the traditional age for college? And does that affect the conversation?
Yes. So I work with people, you know, across age ranges because sometimes people have emergent disabilities, right? Where somebody might have an injury or somebody might have a condition that comes up later in life or at a different
Yeah.
point in life where they need to retool and maybe are considering like going back to school or getting a different degree. Maybe they had been in like a more physical profession and then have to, you know, have to retool to do something different. And so that piece of guidance is almost essential for people, if especially if they didn't have a disability before, because there's a whole big learning curve that occurs when someone is thinking about going in, you know, back to school, you know, either to get a certificate or get vocational training or to a 4-year institution or whatever, or even into a master's program or a
Mhm.
PhD program. Um, because you have to think about, you know, what is the condition, what are the accommodations they might need, and they have to be well versed on that because they'll have to go
Yeah.
through the process to request the accommodations. So, specifically in my program with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, I have a lot more adults who are going back to school or
Yeah.
are sort of retooling and thinking about, you know, different paths for themselves. Um, Primarily, I do work with high school students, but
Mhm.
I work with people of all ages. And sometimes, and high school student is broad too, because many of
Yeah.
the students that I work with, especially if they have chronic health conditions, they might have larger gaps in their educational journey because of their health condition. So they might have had surgeries or had to take time off, taking a medical leave during high school. So they might even be
Yeah.
19 or 20 by the time that they're thinking about college too. So like there's a wide range there as well. So yeah.
No, that just popped into my head of what different time periods may affect how you actually deal with the individual. Um, but so any lasting words of advice or any other suggestions? Obviously, I did put Annie's the link for Annie's course in the chat if anyone's interested in looking for that and for more information. Her website is accessiblecollege.com. Please check her out. And just to reiterate as well that Help Hope Live is here to help you fundraise toward any of your medical and medical related expenses, such as the PCA or those scooters that you might need to navigate college, or any of, you know, transportation that you might need getting to and from your locations. So please reach out to us as well if you have interest in starting fundraising. Kasie, Austin, do you have, I mean, you guys have offered such wonderful pieces of wisdom already. Is there anything else that you want to offer to the group and just in general about navigating this experience?
Yeah, I think just really reiterating kind of what I said earlier of just like it's going to be hard.
Mhm.
It's going to be hard, but really don't let that um kind of not
Yeah.
don't let that push you away completely. You know, like you're going to go through those days. But I think find a piece that you would much rather deal with that than just completely just avoiding it all. You know, it's worth it. It really is worth it.
Wonderful. Kasie, any last
I think
piece
as
of
a
advice from
parent,
the parent or PCA?
yeah, as a parent, I would just like to say that there's a lot of students out there, people out there, adults and parents who are concerned about the finances of college.
Yes, thank
And
you.
yes, disabilities can be very difficult financially. And so then the idea of, oh my goodness, I do want to go to college because I would like to get off of assistance and I would like to have more control of my life and to have a career and make choices. But how do I do this? It's so overwhelming. Thank you for, you know, people like you that help with that. But also just know that there is a number of organizations and foundations out there that really support a lot. Austin applied to a number of college scholarships for people with disabilities. And his first year, between his academic scholarship and all of that, his first year was completely paid for, all of it.
That is
And
amazing.
and then this year, all but 3,000, I think, was paid for, because you hold your GPA and they usually hold your scholarships. So, like Swim with Mike, Brian Reich Foundation, he got a local Irvin Coffin scholarship. Life Without Limits was also local.
Yeah.
So check your local scholarships too, within your county and all that. And so again, when we first started looking at him going to college, it just seems so overwhelming oh, how are we going to do this financially? How are we going to do this? But one step at a time, know that there are answers for everything, and do not give up your dreams.
Yes, absolutely.
They are worth doing whatever you got to do to get there.
Was there or is there one place that you started in looking for all of those scholarships and programs that you would say that you would help guide people to?
Well, there was recommendations from some people. Was that Shepherd? Or
I just remember doing massive Google searches.
Google searches, yeah, I'm sure.
there's a
college scholarships for people with disabilities.
Thankfully, with there being a lot out there,
Mhm.
most of it can simply just be a Google search and just like scholarships for spinal cord injury,
Yeah.
scholarships for paralysis. And they're there. They really are there, and they'll help you. And they really want to help you.
Yes.
These foundations and scholarships that I've gotten, just so kind, so encouraging, and very much investing in you, because they see the importance of not giving up. They see the importance of that. Students with disabilities, like, they are still just students. Go to the college you want to, get the education you want, do what you want to do, and we'll help you do that. So and so they're very kind and encouraging, and they'll help you get there.
Awesome.
Sunny, can I add something to
Please, after I was going to you anyway.
So two things. First, shameless plug for my Facebook group, which is called College
Yes.
Success, Physical Disabilities, Chronic Health, and Mental Health, where we often post a bunch of scholarships that people can, we amplify what the other foundations and organizations are putting out so that people know that those things exist. But the other thing is that students with disabilities likely qualify for vocational rehabilitation services in their state. And Voc Rehab will typically cover college tuition or a portion of college tuition. Some of it is income dependent. It varies by state. Voc Rehab is a federal program that is then administered by individual states. So there are nuances. But I think a lot of times students who who are academically capable may not be pinpointed as vocational rehabilitation clients in their high school setting, because people often think that Voc Rehab is specifically for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities or autism spectrum disorders, which is sort of the primary audience that goes through the Voc Rehab process, but it's also available to students with physical disabilities, significant chronic health conditions, and other types of disabilities. So and a lot of people don't know that. So that's an important piece of this puzzle, because your funding might be sort of slapped together in different ways, right? It could be funds from foundations, it could be vocational rehabilitation, it could be, funding from scholarships or outside sources or supplemental security income, so Social Security stuff. There's a lot of ways. And then, for tools that you might need, Voc Rehab might also have funding for that. But then we also have Help Hope Live if there's medical needs fundraising, because there are limits to what some, Voc Rehab will pay for, or there are limits to what insurance will pay for. And that's where I think like having Help Hope Live, as a teammate, could be really helpful for people too who are trying to get the resources that they need to be able to be successful in the college setting.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate everyone giving their experiences and their insights to this conversation. It is just the beginning of what could have been, I'm sure, an hours long conversation. Austin, we might have to bring you back. It's in your senior year to see how the back half goes. And just, and Annie, thank you for the work that you consistently do. And thank you to the Reeve Foundation for allowing Annie to do a lot of the work that she does in the community as well. And thank you to everyone who joined us and anyone who's watching after the fact. This is a really important conversation and one that, we hope to continue to have. So thank you guys. And please keep an eye out on helphopelive.org for our latest. Check us out on our YouTube page for the rest of our Hope Talk series. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And thank you to Kasie, Austin, and Annie for joining us all today.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you all so much.
Absolutely. Thank you guys. Have a great day.
You too.